In the summer of 1858, an intense heat wave settled over Chicago. Horses collapsed in the streets, and the pavement softened beneath people's feet. Looking for relief, thousands of residents turned to the only affordable escape available: cheap ice cream sold from metal tins on nearly every street corner. Then, people began to die. A few at first, then dozens, then hundreds. Doctors diagnosed the victims with typhoid fever, a bacterial infection that attacks the internal organs. By the end of the summer, the epidemic claimed over 1,500 lives in Chicago alone. City officials eventually traced the outbreak to the ice itself. It had been harvested directly from the city's lakes, right where the raw sewage drained. Those blocks were packed in sawdust, shipped to factories, and used to freeze the very dessert people were buying to survive the heat. The tragedy in Chicago exposed a specific historical friction. By the 19th century, massive urban populations desperately wanted ice cream, but the sanitation, infrastructure, and technology required to produce it safely at scale simply did not exist. To see a time when supply and safety were not issues, we have to look back to the 7th century Tang dynasty in China. Here, the dessert was safe precisely because it was entirely exclusive. Emperor Taizong maintained special guarded ice houses in the mountains. According to court records, his chefs took the winter snow and mixed it with buffalo milk, flour, and camphor, an aromatic plant extract that created a sharp, cooling sensation in the mouth. Only the emperor and his inner circle were permitted to eat it. The chefs entrusted with its preparation were sworn to strict secrecy, and revealing the recipe carried severe punishments. For thousands of years, ice cream remained trapped behind this knowledge bottleneck. It was a closely guarded luxury, intentionally isolated from the everyday public. That isolation slowly eroded as chilled sleets leaked out of the palaces and moved along the Silk Road. In the bustling markets of the Arab world, vendors began selling sherbet, a refreshing drink made by mixing fruit juice, snow, and sugar. This tradition traveled through Arab-influenced Sicily, where it evolved into crushed ice granita, and eventually made its way into mainland Europe. A popular legend claims that Catherine de' Medici brought the recipe from Florence to Paris in 1533, but historical records from the 16th century contain no mention of this. The story was fabricated nearly 400 years later. The actual popularization occurred in places like Café Procope, opened in Paris in 1686 by Francesco Procopio. He served fruit, chocolate, and vanilla ice creams in elegant glass dishes, establishing the dessert as a status symbol for the city's educated and wealthy elite. By the 17th century, the recipe was public knowledge in Europe. Yet a massive physical barrier kept it out of reach for most people. The primary ingredient, ice, was a scarce seasonal resource, affordable only to the aristocracy who could build private ice houses. In the early 19th century, a 22-year-old Boston entrepreneur named Frederick Tudor proposed a solution that the local press openly mocked. He planned to carve ice directly out of frozen New England lakes and ship it to warmer climates. The process relied on intense, brutal physical labor. Workers used long handsaws to cut massive blocks from the frozen surface, hauling them out of the freezing water so they could be packed in thick layers of sawdust for insulation. After his first shipments melted and he landed in debtor's prison, Tudor refined his storage methods. He slowly built a functioning, insulated supply chain, eventually expanding his trade from the Caribbean all the way out to India and Australia. As these trade routes matured, Tudor flooded urban centers with a reliable supply of natural ice, earning him the nickname the Ice King. Tudor successfully solved the resource bottleneck, but even with cheap ice readily available on city streets, converting it into ice cream still required hours of grueling manual stirring. In 1843, an American inventor named Nancy Johnson patented a device that removed this labor barrier entirely: the hand-cranked ice cream maker. Her design featured a rotating paddle set inside a metal container. The user packed the outer tub with ice and salt. The salt lowered the freezing point, while the constant churning prevented large ice crystals from forming. A process that once took hours was reduced to just 20 minutes. With production simplified, ice cream flooded American streets and soda fountains. When local religious regulations, known as blue laws, prohibited the sale of carbonated soda on Sundays, fountain owners adapted. They dropped the soda water and served just the ice cream topped with syrup, creating the sundae. By the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, mass demand collided directly with a lack of serving infrastructure. Over 20 million people attended the event, and vendors quickly exhausted their supply of paper cups. According to the most widely accepted account, a Syrian immigrant named Ernest Hamwi was selling thin, waffle-like pastries in a neighboring booth. Seeing the problem, he rolled one of his pastries into a cone to hold the ice cream, solving the container shortage on the spot. Through mechanical engineering and clever, spontaneous workarounds, ice cream shed its aristocratic origins and became an accessible, working-class street food. As the 20th century progressed, global demand outpaced what hand cranks and frozen lakes could provide. The market required a level of scale that only industrial science could deliver. In the late 1940s, a team of British researchers, including a young chemist named Margaret Roberts, later known as Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, discovered how to pump extra air into the mixture during churning. This reduced ingredient costs, improved stability, and created what we now call soft serve. A decade earlier, the Soviet Union took a different path to mass production. In the 1930s, Anastas Mikoyan, the Soviet commissar for the food industry, traveled to the United States to study American manufacturing, bringing factory techniques back to the USSR. The state implemented strict production standards for its classic plombier, mandating high dairy fat and consistent quality across all regions. Ice cream became such a normalized, accessible commodity that Soviet citizens regularly consumed it outside in the dead of winter. Between chemical innovations in the West and state-sponsored industrialization in the East, the final barriers of seasonal weather dependency and heavy manual labor were permanently dismantled. Today, ice cream is a $200 billion globalized industry. It constantly adapts to modern consumer preferences, expanding into lactose-free and plant-based recipes made from oat and coconut milk. This level of accessibility is not the result of a single inventor or a sudden stroke of genius. It is the product of a millennium of cumulative problem-solving. From the Tang Dynasty palaces to American factories, engineers, chemists, and street vendors systematically broke through bottlenecks of knowledge, resources, labor, and scale. Through centuries of iterative innovation, they successfully democratized an ancient emperor's luxury.